While feeding his chickens, Farmer Eli stumbled across a strange egg. An egg with a strange, almost rubbery shell. It felt strange in his weather-beaten hands, unlike the thousands he had picked up over the years. With a mixture of curiosity and concern, he decided it was time to look at what was inside. When the bowl cracked, Eli's usual calm attitude gave way to a startled exclamation. "Stay behind!" Eli dropped the egg on the floor and jumped backwards. Of all the things he imagined in it, he never expected it to be something like this. He quickly called the emergency number because he knew that it was something scary. It was certainly not one of his chickens that had laid the egg, so how on earth had it ended up on his land? The smell of the egg was wild, and Eli began to choke. If one of his chickens had eaten the egg, it would have become very sick. When the police arrived, they all flinched at the sight of the egg. Eli didn't know how to explain what had happened, but he had an idea of who could have done this to him. Eli was stunned when he heard what the egg actually was. This could have ended much worse if he hadn't found the egg, and not just for his chickens. Whoever had done this to him was really cruel. But what was in the egg? Who had laid the egg on Eli's land? And what could have happened if he hadn't found it? Every morning Eli went for a walk in the morning sun, fed his chickens, and collected their eggs. They had their own coop, but some chickens preferred to lay their eggs in the grass, so Eli always kept his eyes open for a stray egg. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that looked a little out of place. At first, he thought it was a potato, but as Eli got closer, he saw that it looked more like an egg. The placement was strange, though, because none of his chickens came to this part of his country. When he bent down to pick it up, he quickly withdrew his arm when he could take a closer look at the egg. "What the hell is that?" he muttered to himself. The egg didn't look normal, and Eli thought hard about what it could be. Was it a chicken egg, or from another animal? He looked around and found a small stick. He carefully poked around the side of the egg and found that the shell was softer than normal chicken eggs. It looked almost rubbery. Eli thought it might be a prank and decided to pick it up. He picked up the egg with a handkerchief and carefully carried it into his house. He had a flashlight in his garage with which he wanted to check if there was any sign of life inside. While he got his flashlight, he placed the egg on a small plate on the kitchen counter. But when he returned a few minutes later, the egg was gone. Eli was stunned. He looked at the floor and thought the egg might have rolled off the plate. But there was nothing, not even a drop of liquid. That was really confusing. The egg couldn't have run away, could it? Just as he was about to go outside again, he heard his son laughing in the living room. Eli's stomach immediately fell over. He ran into the living room and saw his son playing with the egg. "Wait! Stop!" Eli screamed as he pulled his son backwards. "It's not for playing!" Eli's son looked at his father in confusion. Then his eyes became sad. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes filling with tears. Eli sighed. He must have frightened his son. He quickly hugged him and told him that it wasn't his fault. Together, they placed the egg on the flashlight to see if there was any sign of life in it. To Eli's surprise, it looked as if there was a strange liquid in it. Confused about what that could be, he decided to break open the egg. So he grabbed a small bucket to collect the liquid. Eli shouted to his son, "Hurry up! Get the safety gear!" The boy ran off and almost stumbled in his haste. They put on gloves and goggles and looked as if they were tackling a scientific project and not an agricultural task. The egg now seemed like a ticking time bomb, with its strange hissing and frothy substance coming out of the egg. They were ready, but definitely not thrilled with what was coming. After all precautions were taken, Eli carefully tapped the egg against the bucket. The hissing grew louder, and suddenly the egg jumped wide open. Instead of a chick or yolk, a neon green foam exploded, covering the bucket and almost missing their faces. "What on earth happened?" Eli exclaimed. The son approached, frightened and fascinated at the same time, as his curiosity had been aroused by this bizarre turn of events. When Eli recognized the potential danger, his protective instinct kicked in. "We have to clean up this mess safely," he instructed, and looked at the sizzling foam on the wooden table. They fetched baking soda from the kitchen to neutralize the unknown substance and worked together like a danger team in a movie. The whole situation felt surreal when they cleaned up a mysterious egg stain on a quiet farm evening. When the immediate danger seemed to be under control, Eli noticed something even more disturbing. The foam had a mark etched into the wood, indicating its corrosive nature. "That was no ordinary egg," he murmured, with a mixture of anger and fear in his voice. The thought that someone might have placed it there on purpose made his blood boil. Who would attack a peaceful farm with such a vicious act? Their cleanup work was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. Eli and his son exchanged a glance and wondered who that could be at this time. Since they hardly had the situation with the eggs under control, they were not in the mood for visitors. Eli wiped his hands on his pants and got ready to face the one standing outside. Little did he know that this encounter would add another layer of mystery to their already strange night. They put on the masks and forced the bridges into their noses. Despite the masks, the air felt thick due to the smell. Eli and his son opened all the windows and tried to dispel the foul smell with fresh air. They moved hurriedly, almost bumping into each other in their haste. A silent dance between father and son against an invisible enemy. Next, they focused on cleaning up the spilled contents that had settled on the floor. They grabbed sponges and buckets of soapy water and scrubbed vigorously, trying not to be distracted by the smell. It was dirty work, as the goo stuck to the sponges, but they kept going, determined to remove the last remnant of the strange substance. While cleaning, Eli's son found something shiny in the goo. "Dad, look!" he shouted, holding up a small metallic object. They rinsed it off, and what appeared was what looked like a tiny chip or a piece of sophisticated technology. This discovery posed even more mystery to the situation. What was this object doing in an egg? And above all, where did the egg come from? They decided to keep the chip as evidence and put it in a transparent plastic bag. Eli knew they had to report this to someone, but who would believe a story about a strange egg with a chip in it? He thought about what they should do next, because he knew they wouldn't be able to do it alone. The farm had suddenly become the setting for a science fiction story. While they were discussing what to do next, spotlights lit up the driveway. A car they didn't know drove up, which added to the already high tension of the evening. Eli and his son looked at each other, curiosity mixed with a little fear. Who could that be? And what would this visitor contribute to their already complicated situation? They waited and watched as the car door was opened. Eli and his son moved quickly, tore open the windows and pushed the doors wide open. The fresh air fought against the persistent stench and slowly gained ground. They worked in silence, for they agreed that speed was of the essence. When the house began to ventilate, they exchanged a brief, hopeful look. Maybe, just maybe, they would get the matter under control after all. Eli picked up the phone and dialed with a steady hand. His voice was calm as he explained the situation to the dispatcher, though his words sounded incredible even to his own ears. "An egg with some kind of chemical in it," he described. He and his son exchanged worried glances and waited for the answer of the mediation. The promise that help was on the way was a small consolation in this chaos. Together, They began to secure the area around the burst egg with kitchen chairs and paper warning signs. "No trespassing," Eli scribbled, and his son added a sketch of a skull to enhance the effect. In this way, they made the best of a bad situation and turned their kitchen into a makeshift danger zone. Time seemed to drag on while they waited. Eli paced up and down the living room while his son sat on the couch, and his legs rocked with nervousness. At every car sound, they looked out the window, hoping to see the flashing lights of the police or some sign of promised help. The tension in the air was palpable. A silent storm was brewing. Finally, headlights drove into the driveway, but it was not the police. An inconspicuous van without marking drove up, and two figures got out, wearing something like protective suits. Eli and his son exchanged confused looks. Who were these people? And how did they know about the situation? As the figures approached the house, Eli realized that this night was far from over war. Eli and his son watched as the police officers grimaced around the living room, holding their sleeves over their noses. They did not seem to be prepared for the intensity of the smell. Eli explained what had happened as best he could, and his voice sounded haunting. The officers nodded and immediately decided to take everyone outside. The seriousness on their faces told Eli that this was no ordinary situation. The family and the police met in the backyard for a meeting. The decision was clear. Eli's house had to be sealed off for security reasons. Yellow tape was put up and formed a barrier between them and their own house. When Eli saw his house turn into a restricted zone, he felt a mixture of disbelief and worry. His greatest concern now was the welfare of his son, who stood silently by his side. Soon after, a team in protective suits arrived and moved precisely towards the house. They entered through the front door, which Eli had left wide open. From the backyard, Eli and his son could only watch as the team took samples in the house. The sight of people in hazmat suits swarming around his house was surreal, like a scene from a movie Eli never wanted to be in. The forensic experts worked diligently, taking photos and bagging evidence. Eli tried to get a better look, but an officer gently held him back and explained that they had to keep the area clear. Eli felt helpless and hoped that the team would find something that could explain the bizarre events of the evening. His son, who was equally worried, stayed nearby and sought confirmation in his father's presence. An ambulance rolled into the driveway, making the situation even more serious. The paramedics approached Eli and his son and told them that they needed to check them for contact with harmful substances. When they were taken to the ambulance for a quick examination, Eli found a small comfort in the quick response. But in his head the question was, what would happen next, and what the safety of his family was. Under the glaring lights of the ambulance, Eli and his son hesitantly followed the paramedics' instructions and exchanged their clothes for the simple spare clothes provided. In their unfamiliar clothes, they felt exposed and vulnerable, a stark reminder of how quickly the night had become surreal. The paramedics worked efficiently. Their professionalism was a small comfort in the midst of the chaos. Then came the examinations. Using gloves and flashlights, the paramedics examined every inch of Eli and his son for signs of contact with the mysterious substance. They recorded their vitals, asked if they felt unusual in any way, and took notes on their clipboards. Despite the strange situation, Eli appreciated her thoroughness because he knew that everything was done in the name of safety. After the medical examinations, Eli's frustration boiled over. He turned to the nearest officer and desperately asked for information about what they were dealing with, but the official answered only non-committally and advised patience until the experts had more to say. Eli's thirst for answers remained unquenched. and he felt more and more helpless and isolated the longer the night lasted. The police and the forensic team continued their work, cordoning off areas and collecting samples. Eli and his son could only watch from a distance. The yellow duct tape was a physical barrier that reflected their emotional separation from the ordeal. The lack of information was agonizing, and with each passing moment, the list of unanswered questions for Eli grew longer and longer. As the night grew deeper, the initial rush slowed down to a steady, methodical pace. Eli and his son, now a little removed from the immediate danger, were in a kind of limbo of waiting. Surrounded by the officers going in and out of their homes, they stood together in the silence of the night, wondering what the morning would bring and how profound the effects of this strange event would be. Eli paced back and forth, unable to hide his concern. With every minute that he received no answers, he became more concerned about his son's well-being. The uncertainty of when they would be able to return home only deepened his concern. He tried to stay calm in front of his son, but the stress of the situation made it incredibly difficult to keep a brave face. The sight of Farmer Greg coming up the driveway added a new level of tension to the already tense atmosphere. Eli watched him approach. His presence was unwelcome. Greg's timing couldn't have been worse, and Eli was at the end of his patience. The events of the evening had meant that he had little tolerance for interruptions, especially when it was someone with whom he had a complicated past. Eli's frustration finally boiled over when Greg tried to offer his help. The offer felt hollow when you thought about their past disputes. "I think it's best if you go, Greg," Eli said in a firm and cold voice. The situation was already explosive enough without old disputes being added. Greg's worried facade did little to hide the underlying tensions between them. Greg's attempt to show concern seemed disingenuous to Eli. There was a certain uneasiness in the air, a reminder of the unresolved problems that lay between them. Greg's insistence on helping only irritated Eli even more. It was clear that the bond they had once split was frayed, leaving little room for real empathy or help in this crisis. When Greg turned to leave, the discomfort remained. Eli looked after him, and a mixture of relief and additional worry clouded his thoughts. The encounter had been short but intense, and had made both men even more aware of the distance between them. Despite the drama of the night, Eli refocused on his son and the unsolved mystery of the dangerous egg. The encounter with Greg was just another complication in an already complex situation. Eli watched as Greg was taken away, with the police's resolute stance making it clear that no outside interference was desired. This incident added another layer to the already complicated relationship between the two neighbors. The brief interaction was polite but tense, and made clear the distance that had grown between them over the years. It was a reminder of how much had changed and how little had been resolved. The seriousness with which the police surrounded his house and the fact that Greg was turned away underscored the seriousness of the situation. Eli couldn't help but feel isolated as the investigation continued, enveloping his house like a thick fog. The sight of the officers meticulously combing through his garden, where he had spent countless peaceful mornings, was disturbing. His home felt strange, transformed by the intrusion of law enforcement. Even though Greg had left, the timing of his visit stuck in Eli's memory, casting a shadow of doubt. Why now? The thought gnawed at him as he tried to focus on the immediate crisis. Despite the chaos, Eli couldn't shake off the suspicion that there was more to Greg's sudden appearance. Their relationship, once defined by a simple neighborly nod, now seemed to be a puzzle with missing pieces. The encounter with Greg brought back memories of their previous relationships, which were now burdened by unspoken tensions. What had once been a brief exchange now felt burdened with unspoken complaints, and Eli realized that the simplicity of their previous interactions had vanished, replaced by a complexity he neither understood nor welcomed. It was a shift that added emotional weight to an already difficult situation. As Greg's figure faded from view, Eli felt a growing sense of isolation. The police order for Greg to leave the house was necessary, but it also reminded Eli how lonely he was in this crisis. While his house was sealed off and his neighbor turned away, Eli stood on his property and felt lonelier than ever. The investigation had built a wall around him, both literally and figuratively, so that he could only deal with the unfolding mystery with his son at his side. After the police had taken Greg away, Eli stood in the yard, lost in thought. He tried to understand why Greg showed up at such a chaotic time. Was it mere curiosity or something else? The visit left Eli with more questions than answers, and he couldn't help but wonder about the reasons for Greg's unexpected appearance at his doorstep amid the riots. The paramedics gave the all-clear for Eli and his son, a small relief in the midst of the chaos. But the sight of her house, which is still surrounded by barrier tape, was a hard pill to swallow. He underlined the fact that the crisis was far from over, despite the clearance certificate. The family's refuge had become the center of a disturbing investigation. Eli's wife came home, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief, as she looked at the scene. Her arrival brought with it a new wave of emotions, which made clear the strain that the incident had placed on the family. Together they stood there, a unit, shaken by the events that had taken place on their once peaceful property. Their presence added to the personal toll that this public ordeal had taken on all of them. As the situation escalated, the search for more eggs became more and more hectic. Eli, his family, and the investigators scoured the property, as the possibility of more such dangers lurking in the grass made their efforts even more urgent. The discovery of more eggs would confirm her fears of a targeted attack and exacerbate the crisis that had gripped her house. Eli struggled with his wife's suspicions as to who might be responsible for the eggs. Despite their convincing arguments, he was reluctant to share these thoughts with the police. This hesitation added an inner struggle to the outer chaos, torn between his wife's intuition and his own doubts. Eli's conflict was palpable and made the already tense situation even more complex. Eli and his wife stood in their backyard, the scene of the recent chaos, and had a quiet but intense discussion. They weighed their options and debated whether they should investigate their suspicions or wait for more evidence. The stakes were incredibly high, and every point of view seemed to pull them in opposite directions. The decision they had to make was not only about the next step, but also about securing the future of their family. Their discussion was abruptly interrupted when Eli's son called from the edge of the property and held up what seemed to be another one of those strange eggs. The discovery confirmed their worst fears. This was no coincidence. The presence of more eggs around their farm underscored the scale of the threat they faced. It was a frightening moment that made clear the intention behind the attack. Back at their house, Eli and his wife continued their discussion, now with a sense of urgency. They swayed back and forth between the merits of caution and the need to act decisively. The discovery of more eggs made it clear that restraint was no longer an option. They had to find a way to save their farm and their family from further harm. The situation had developed from a bizarre incident to a seemingly deliberate act of sabotage. Eli felt the burden of responsibility weigh down on him. The evidence of a targeted attack mounted, making his initial hesitation to share his wife's suspicions with the authorities increasingly difficult to justify. The pressure to share everything they knew became too much to ignore. Eli realized that withholding information was no longer a viable option. The safety of his family and the integrity of their farm were at stake. The evidence was clear and indicated that they were intentionally harmed. With a heavy heart, Eli knew that it was time to share his suspicions and those of his wife with the police. It was a decision that could change everything, but silence was a risk they could no longer afford. Eli finally told of his long-standing rivalry with Greg, which drastically shifted the focus of the investigation. When he spoke to the police, it became clear that deeper, more evil intentions were hidden behind the seemingly harmless competition. This revelation shed new light on the situation and made everyone involved see the events with different eyes. The atmosphere was characterized by the expectation of what this new direction would bring to light. The investigation into Greg revealed disturbing truths about the undercurrents within the community. The benevolent view of the competition crumbled, revealing a web of jealousy and sabotage that went deeper than anyone had suspected. This change of perspective was a wake-up call for the community, highlighting the dangers of uncontrolled rivalry and how far some would go to prevail. The police's decision to expand their investigation to Greg's farm marked a crucial turning point. With a search warrant in hand, they meticulously combed his property in search of evidence that could link him to the sabotage. The community watched with excitement as the once quiet dispute between neighbors expanded into a full-scale criminal investigation that signaled a step toward accountability and justice. At Greg's farm, the police find irrefutable evidence linking Greg to the case. He had buckets of the same liquid and empty eggshells standing next to them, ready to fill them. These materials were identical to the contents found in the eggs on Eli's property, which directly implicates Greg in the act of sabotage. Greg had no choice but to confess. Greg's shocking confession finally opened the door to resolving the deep-seated issues between him and Eli. He had planted the eggs, which contained a mixture of pesticides and herbicides, so that Eli's crops would die and he would earn more money. He never wanted anyone to get hurt, and he expressed regret that things had gotten so out of hand. After his confession, Greg was taken into custody. His face was a mixture of regret and resignation. The sight of Greg being taken away was sobering for the community and highlighted the gravity of his actions. It was a moment that would forever change the dynamic between Eli and Greg, as well as the community's perception of agricultural competition. Greg's motives, which he revealed to the public, painted a picture of a man driven to the brink of the abyss by financial desperation. His confession at the police station, detailing his plan to sabotage Eli's crops, was a hard pill to swallow for many. It was not only an admission of guilt, but also an insight into the pressures faced by modern farmers and evoked sympathy from his neighbors. The case against Greg set new legal and social standards for dealing with agricultural sabotage. The community grappled with the complexity of the situation and understood the need for legal consequences, but also recognized the importance of compassion and support for the struggling farmers. This balance between equity and empathy sparked discussions about how to better address the underlying issues that lead to such drastic measures. Eli's decision not to press charges came as a surprise to many and reflects his deep belief in second chances and the power of forgiveness. This decision was not easy for him, but it was driven by a desire to heal the community and put the incident behind him. With his gesture, Eli handed Greg an olive branch, offered him a path to make amends, and set an example of reconciliation instead of retaliation. Eli and Greg's agreement to make a fresh start and leave their rivalry behind was a significant moment for the entire community. This decision to accept forgiveness and work together for the common good was a testament to their growth and the resilience of their relationship. It was the beginning of a new chapter based on mutual respect and cooperation, in the hope of fostering a stronger and more united community.